DRC developments, we are now joined by Izak Khomo, our commentator and analyst on African affairs. Izak, thank you so much for joining us on Your World. The DRC Foreign Minister says that violence is possible with when Kabila's term ends, which is December the 20th. This must be coming from a sitting minister?
Yes, it's expected because to say that the opposition has actually said they're going to tackle the government.
When they say tackle the government, what exactly do they mean?
They mean just what they do. What they mean, tackle the government in the streets. And that means violence and everything else. It's a warning that has been floating ever since October, ever since September.
Should Kabila heed the call? Why has he been ignoring the call by the people?
Well, Kabila has decided not to go for the elections, claiming that the country is not in a position, be it financial or whatever it is. But I think that is the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes people are actually posturing for a very big showdown. And Kabila would just not actually go out and leave the country in a state of flux when the two opposing countries, Rwanda and Burundi, they've actually fortified themselves. The two presidents there, they've actually got rid of the 2 terms. They've gone to the 3 terms, and they are sitting in power. And they're looking at, in fact, 2 countries. It is Burundi and the DRC, which will be in a state of flux. And there be not much of a centralized government or a centralized political party. The opposition political parties are more fragmented to be regional parties. And that will form a very good opportunity for them to once again get into the DRC. So tactically, the Kabila group have decided that no, let us delay this change until we fortify ourselves and we get a proper candidate who could come in and actually present the whole nation and be a formidable foe. And I'm using the word foe on purpose to the two powers, which is Kagame and Museveni. Now,
looking at the opposition parties currently in the DRC, they've called for a march in protest to Kabila stepping down and calling for him to step down. Is the opposition strong enough? How strong are they?
The opposition is not strong enough. In fact, the opposition, I could say it is strong enough. To say you've got a opposition which is in the south amongst the Luba people. They've got the old man Tshisekedi there. And Tshisekedi is an old politician from the days of Seseseko. And you can find that his following is basically regional. And then there are other regional opposition. But basically, it is not that strong and it's not that unified. The big term to use is not unified. If you look at the DRC elections, you've got a country where at election time, there are over, 120 political parties. Each party representing a district or a group of people, but there's no centrally unified party. That's the problem with the DRC. And the problem with the DRC is the danger of fragmentation of the DRC, because some of these parties are actually calling for autonomy and secessionists. And that is being encouraged by many, not only by the neighboring countries who are looking at the DRC, but also by the international, by very powerful countries internationally.
Now, looking at that and looking at the African Union, their stance on the political situation on the DRC, what's your take on that?
Well, the African Union, they don't look at the democratic aspect of any country. When they look at any country, they're looking at peace and security. I think the whole idea of democracy, it died with Thabo Mbeki, but events have overtaken issues of democracy. The most important thing is peace and security. Whatever it is that the AU tries to do is to forestall the breakdown of peace and security. That's the most important thing.
Now, very quickly, the newly appointed Prime Minister of the DRC, Semi Badibanga. Can you tell us a little bit about him, very briefly?
In fact, I could not tell much about Semi Badibanga, but because people were all expecting Vital Kamare to be the Prime Minister. Because that Prime Minister eventually is going to be the candidate in 2018 And people are looking at Vitali Kamere because he was a hardliner when it came to the Uganda and Rwanda, and he was uncompromising. So Kadibanga basically is an unknown, even within the DRC. But the more important thing is that will he be sort of amicable to all the DRC people, to unite the DRC, and not only to unite the DRC for the army and all forces which are for the integrity of the DRC to fight behind him. That's the big question.
Now, do you see Badibanga sort of uniting or assisting in the unification of the DRC and ensuring that there's peace and stability within the DRC?
That is a big question. That is the big question. People do not know much of him. Yeah, I mean, to say that the DRC is a very funny country, that it's only the president who's known. So basically what we've got to do is got to wait and see whether he's...
So how did he become prime minister if people don't know about him?
That's another very big question. People don't know much about him, not only us as journalists, but also internally. Because internally we were talking to people in the DRC, people are looking at Vitali. So that question again is got to be asked, how did he become a candidate? But again, you should understand that with African politics, or in a country like the DRC, it is not only the internal politics that will decide upon the candidates. I mean, these candidates have also got to be somehow approved by the powers that be it Brussels, be it the USA, or be it even the EU. But right now, the USA, they are in limbo because they're getting a new president who's not very much interested in the African situation. A very similar thing to showcase that is in Somalia. The Somali AMISOM is going to be paid now by the EU. They used to be paid by the Americans in dollars. They're going to be paid in euros, simply in anticipation of Trump coming in, and there's no interest in African affairs. So Kadibanga basically, I think he'll be an EU candidate, a candidate that the EU want to be in that position.
Control of African countries, power, African leaders, some of them not wanting to relinquish power, always extending their term in office. Case in point, Kabila tried to do that, and other presidents who've also gone in that direction. Your take, and what's the reasoning behind some of the African leaders not wanting to relinquish power?
I think case and study, I'll come to that to answer that. It's not Kabila, but we'll take Rwanda and Uganda. Yeah, those are the best example. Now the best example is this, that basically with these leaders, these are very powerful leaders, and they've got plans for their countries. But then you find that with any plans that you've got with your countries, be it for the good of the country or for your foreign policy, to actually achieve your goals, those plans have got to be in place for a period of about 15 to 20 years. You can't just have 2 terms and leave. Yeah, so that's what really is happening with the Ugandans and the Rwandans. Those 2 leaders have got very big plans of actually having let me say it openly again, a Tutsi hegemony in that region. And they will never let go until that is actually established. And anybody who wants to oppose that, you've got to be with them, opposing them forever. It does not have to take a new person coming in to start tackling these guys who have got long-term plans, and their plans are already being implemented. So that is what is happening. That's what happened in Burundi. I mean, people are actually looking after the interests. They are interests of their countries. It is not that these people are sort of after looting of money. No, it is more than that. It's geopolitics of those areas.
Succession plans where a successor could take over and continue with the plans that the president has at that point in time.
And that's the type of thing which is needed, but with that you need very powerful political parties. Yeah, because the political parties which have got policies, which have got an ideology, and which have got long-term plans. Yeah, now that is what is actually lacking and weak in the African context, simply because the African economic, the socio-economic situation of Africa is it's in flux, and it's very violent. I mean, volatile, not violent, sorry. Yeah, you find that with the change in the world economic situation, it has a drastic effect on the ground. And you to be there to have a party which is going to be popular, come rain or shine, is very difficult. So these guys, they're really depending more on actually being there and on the army to maintain their hold, not only on political power, but also on their policies. Yeah, politics in Africa, it's a new thing. Politics in Africa has long died. It died with globalization, because the politics of Africans is not determined by the political parties, but it's determined by the IMF and the world's globalization. It's all neoliberal. You've got to conform to it, whether the thing has got a drastic effect on you or not. And that's what makes political parties in Africa basically fake. I mean, to say that Zambia is a good example. You get the opposition parties and the ruling party, their politics is the same, but then it just depends who gets voted in is what the incumbent went through. He couldn't actually sort of maintain the economic growth, and the other person comes in pretending that it's coming with a new policy, but no, it's not. It is just that the people are tired of him, they're going to the other person.
So what needs to be done with the countries on the African continent? How do we resolve issues, especially looking at the DRC currently?
Well, with the DRC, in fact, all African countries are problematic because we have overexposed ourselves. I mean, African countries are overexposed to the vagaries of the world economic forces, yeah? And that's a big problem, and that's what has made them very unstable. Now, what are they supposed to do, and what it is, basically, African countries, the first thing they've got to get back their sovereignty to decide upon their own economic future. But again, they're supposed to actually have a financial base to push those policies, yeah? And that's a vigorous thing, yeah? But it requires a lot of work at a political level, at the economical level, and also maybe I think at the social level. Africa is in a situation of flux, and we'll see there's a danger of African countries fragmenting, yeah, on regional lines. It's a very interesting thing, but people are beginning to look at the whole issue of African nation states and how fragile they are due to the socio-economic upheavals, yeah, which are actually sort of reflecting in the political sphere.
Now, let's speak about the issue of violence on the ground in the DRC, for instance. What does this do to the people of the DRC, the Congolese people? What are they saying on the ground? You being a journalist and communicating with people there in the DRC on a daily basis, what are they saying to you?
You know, the DRC is a wonderful place. The DRC people are not basically violent. People do not know that. I mean, the majority of DRC people are not violent. The majority of DRC people are agriculturists, and they are not violent. They are loud, but not violent. The violent ones are in the northeast. Those are pastoralists. That's where the violence is. The violence in the DRC, it is protests, street protests, which become violence because it's mobs who are coming to burn. And again, there's an element of anarchy, even in the DRC media. People complain about the government when it switches off the social media networks. But basically, if you look at the DRC media, it boils to anarchy. You know, it's very common for a politician to go up and call people in the streets to go and burn down the government building. Yeah, that's what it's all about, which basically is incitement. Yeah, very loud and very irresponsible. But for all that talk and for all what happens, it's this, that violence, it actually never gets to that point. The violence in the DRC, it's in the eastern DRC. So basically, the talk of violence is basically posturing. So you cannot see violence in Kinshasa. Kinshasa cannot become violent as Goma or the Kivu district, where you've got the pastoralists. Yeah. When I talk of the pastoralists, you've got the Hima pastoralists. Those people are very violent, and they're violent. Pastoralists are violent all over the world.
Now, very quickly, going forward, what happens from here on with Kabila and the new Prime Minister Badibanga? What's the situation there? What's going to happen going forward?
Well, it depends upon the opposition. What are they going to do? But again, the opposition, their politics has been driven very much by the West. Yeah, you find that with the loudest people who were talking about this thing of postponing the elections, it was the Americans through their Security Council representative, the lady, just forgot her name. Yeah, she was very loud condemning it. But I mean, so that condemnation was not the same when the Rwandans got rid of the third term. Yeah, so you find that there is also a lot of outside influence or outside interest, so not influence, but interest There are certain countries, when they do something, the opposition gets a lot of support and media support and whatever. But when it takes place in certain countries like Uganda, nothing happens. Like on Saturday, there were 62 Ugandans who were murdered by the security force of Uganda. These people, they were in Kasere region. They were attacked by the army. They were overpowered. They had their hands tied behind their backs, and they were shot dead by the Ugandan army. Yeah? But until now, there's not even one condemnation from any Western country. Yeah? So you ask yourself, why do the Western countries stand?
Izak, this is there's so many aspects to this, and there's so much that we need to unpack and need a lot more time. And unfortunately, we have run out of time. We have to leave it there for now. But thank you so much for joining us. That was Izak Khomo, our commentator and analyst on African affairs.